The underworld is beckoning. Zagreus has successfully beaten, bodied, and bloodied every shade and miscreant in sight, but his journey is over. A new evil arises, and it's up to his sister to solve this mess. Zag had the likes of Zeus, Ares, Aphrodite, Artemis, and the other Olympian pantheon to give him the boons he needed to conquer death and run away from home. So what does Melanoi have at her disposal? Well, given the minute or so of gameplay, we might think it's too early to tell, but developers Supergiant have given us just enough information to chomp on. And today, we're going to take a look at and break down all of the characters that have cropped up so far in Hades 2 and what they could mean for the game. Before we dive in too deep, let's talk about the most important character of the game to come. Melanoi, or Melanoi if you prefer, the character we're going to be raising hell as. According to the game, she's daughter to Hades and brother to the Zagman. So what do we know about Melanoi? Well, she's not exactly the friendliest of characters. She's either a minor goddess or a chthonic nymph, depending on which source you read. Not a fun, frolicky, playful nymph either. No. She's the bringer of nightmares and madness. Her place in mythology puts her as one of several figures tasked with conducting the passage of souls to the underworld, and she's got links to a few figures who are all about witchcraft and magic, but we'll talk about them soon enough. So, we've got ghosts, we've got witchcraft, we've got the transition of souls. Those three things make up the unholy trinity of Melanoi, and will almost certainly be three heavily recurring themes in the game. Although outside of those little tidbits of information, there's not much more we know about her. She's an obscure character, right on the fringe of Greek myth, but that comes with a benefit. This gives Supergiant an almost clean slate to mold her in any which way they like, just as they did with Zagreus. But what about that imposing, mystical woman from the trailer? Shown to be guiding Melanoi in her training and teaching her the ins and outs of combat and magic, that can only be one person. Hecate, or Hecate if you want to use old Shakespeare's pronunciation. But how do we know? Well, several reasons. This powerful goddess was a chief deity of all things magical and a patron of those who wanted to tamper in the world of witchcraft. She was associated with the moon. Often shown with a torch, she's depicted as having three forms, three bodies or three faces. And as we see here, main face, and here, two extra faces, the three forms of Hecate. So I'm pretty confident with that identification. And if I'm wrong, well, then I'll eat my sandals. But a name is one thing. Who she actually is and what she could mean for the game is another matter. As we've covered, she's an important figure in witchcraft. She personifies crossroads and difficult choices. Difficult choices you'll no doubt find in the game. Do you go for the Daedalus hammer or the double boon? She's associated with boundaries, such as the metaphysical boundaries between life and death. She was certainly worshipped in the ancient world, but not in the ways of Zeus, Poseidon, or Athena. No, her following lay on the fringes, the outskirts, just as she lay on the sidelines of the Olympian gods. She also had quite the green thumb and knew all there is to know about plants. She'd mix up poultices and potions, deadly venoms and potent poisons, and she simply adored garlic. With that in mind, we shouldn't be surprised if that ends up worming its way into the sequel. Perhaps rather than catching fish in the river Styx, we're hunting for rare plant life. So that's Hecate, set to be an integral character for Hades 2, unless of course it doesn't actually turn out to be her, in which case, sorry, let's move on. Apollo. Where Hecate may be a champion of the moon, Apollo is the golden-haired guardian of the sun. Twin brother of Artemis, he was worshipped for his bowmanship, unmatched musical ability, and his unblemished and otherworldly good looks. As we saw in the first game, each and every god is, well, attractive is an understatement. But Apollo was above and beyond even then by a country mile. He was considered the most Greek of all the gods, the pinnacle of male beauty. But it wasn't all style with no substance. Apollo was wise and just, and played important counsel to Zeus. Furthermore, he was athletic and battle-hardened. Where Artemis is the queen of archery during the hunt, Apollo excelled on the field of war. He protected the young into adulthood and provided divine intervention to several great heroes, from Jason to Heracles. However, while the paragon of light may seem like the golden child of Olympus, he, like all the other gods, wasn't without his fiery temper. No mortal perhaps received the scorn of Apollo more than Achilles. But that's a story for another time. In terms of the game, we're expecting Apollo to provide some boons that improve your ranged prowess. Given he's god of the sun, there'll certainly be some daze or stun mechanic tied in with his powers too. Wouldn't hurt to also place a bet on an explosive tantrum here and there. What with that famed temper and all. Alongside Apollo, and just as terrifying if her wrath is incurred, we have Nemesis, the goddess of retribution. Well, not just plain old eye for an eye retribution, she also covers divine retribution, which is to be feared much, much more. Her role is to enact punishments on those who show hubris or impiety before the gods. Abandon your sacrifices, defile a temple, or directly mock Poseidon's beard, and you won't just incur his wrath, but also that of the fearsome Nemesis. By some accounts, she is a daughter of Nyx, which makes her a sibling of the Moirai, the three fates, as well as Thanatos and Hypnos. In some sources, she had a rather unfortunate incident with the sky father Zeus. I won't go into detail, but it involves a frightened goose, a horny swan, and ends in 1,000 ships sailing to Troy. I'll let you fill in the blanks. Ignoring Zeus's foolhardy escapades, Nemesis was not a god to be trifled with. She was direct, blunt, and ruthless when needed. Translated into the world of Hades 2, and we're expecting a character who we're terrified of, but also want to be besties with, kind of like Megara. If she's to provide boons, Supergiant could get creative with her. Mechanics that are thematic to her place in the mythos could be a lot of fun. Retaliation when being hit, or counterattacks both seem plausible, and would introduce a style of play that would be refreshing to see. But that's Nemesis. And if you thought she was imposing, wait till you meet her brother, Moros. And so another sibling enters the fray, and possibly the most troublesome of the litter. Moros is a hate-filled spirit and the personification of doom. It doesn't seem quite as clear-cut as Thanatos' domain of death. There is some overlap, and also some key differences. Where Thanatos might deal with a mortal's peaceful death and their delivery to the underworld, Moros is a bit more sinister. He isn't concerned with a mortal simply dying. He steps in to enact the inescapable notion of impending death, its inevitability, and the assured suffering that follows. He's sometimes referred to as the all-destroying god, because death is not the release from suffering it might be with Thanatos. No, with Moros, it's merely the beginning. Once a soul has left its mortal shell, a whole new realm of suffering and agony awaits if you're in Moros' charge. He sounds delightful, doesn't he? We had the concept of doom pop up in the first Hades, tied to Ares' kit. It wouldn't surprise us to see that mechanic get reworked, fleshed out, and given some extra love under Moros' eye. All in all, a pretty unnerving and deeply unsettling character. But it looks like he's on our side, so that's great for us. And finally, there's Dora. Our guess is that this is going to be like the maid Medusa in Hades 1, a creation of Supergiant, but with a tie to real mythology. We're putting money on this being a reference to Pandora, the first human woman. Created by Hephaestus, Pandora was given charge of not a box, but a pithos, a great urn, and tasked not to open it. She, being a human, obviously opened it, and in doing so, unleashed all sickness, evil, death, and misery onto the world. So we can imagine she's got a few stories to tell. Did I say finally before? My apologies. We've got one more to cover. The big bad of the game, the slow sickle of time and father of Hades. He who has escaped and now holds the god of the underworld in shackles, Kronos. Now there aren't many figures in Greek mythology who are as vile, repugnant, savage, evil, and utterly dislikable as Kronos. I'm not just saying this to hype up the antagonist of the game. He truly was the worst. Ancient Greek myths are full of sons overthrowing their fathers, but Kronos took it a step too far. He didn't simply usurp his dad, the primordial deity Uranos. He, how should I put it, removed his fathering ability. Just took his sickle and whoop, off it came. Pretty sickening, huh? Well, it gets worse. Scared of having the same treatment done to him, he opted to play it safe with his own kids. So he ate them. He just gobbled them straight up. He devoured Demeter, pigged out on Poseidon, inhaled Hera and Hades, ensuring no child could escape to grow up and overthrow him. But all his children ended up in his belly, all but one. Zeus managed to escape the dinner table and get far away from his father. After he'd grown to manhood, or man-godhood, he returned and challenged Kronos. He dislodged his brothers and sisters from his father's belly, and he and the partially digested gods waged war against Kronos and the other titans. The ensuing battle, called the Titanomachy, lasted 10 years, but the Olympians prevailed. Some titans, such as Kronos, were imprisoned beneath Tartarus. Some were given painful, eternal punishments, like Atlas, A few were spared punishment as they helped the Olympians, most notably Prometheus. But his story was only just beginning. So there Kronos lay, imprisoned and bitter. This father-slaying, infant-gorging, terrible leader of the Titans was set to remain here for all eternity. Until, according to Hades 2, he just wasn't.
Now go. Death to Kronos.
Death to Kronos.
So, the tyrannical Titan has broken free and is looking to get things right the second time around. He has Hades imprisoned, and as for the other gods, well, only time will tell. Kronos' escape signals a second Titanomachy, which may result in the gods we know and love being somewhat scarce from Hades 2, because they've got to, deal with that whole mess. Instead, Melanoi will likely have to rely on more obscure figures and fringe deities, some of which we've seen, and some we could only speculate about, and that's exactly what we'll do. But not today. That's enough father-slaying, swan-copulating, and general mythical nastiness for me. But stay tuned for our next video, where we'll scour through Greek myths and hazard a guess at a few key characters who might make an appearance in Hades 2.